Okay, let's simply discuss a little bit and reflect what we learned. Jenny, Henning, can you switch on cameras again? And then we just communicate a little bit. So I just prepared a few questions, but I think we can discuss. We're all in the sector for such a long time. Maybe as an icebreaker. So I think Jenny talked a little bit about a slump, but in the end, year-on-year growth was over 30%, 35%, depending on what the numbers were. So if you would look on a scale from 1 to 10, how, and obviously you come from different angles, how happy were you with the solar sector's development in 2024?
Yeah, I start, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, if we only look at 2024, I'd probably only give it a 5 or 6, right? Because it was a year characterized by very fierce competition, as already said. If we look at it from a longer perspective, then maybe much, or for sure much higher, because what 2024 will finally lead to is a more structured industry, because we do see that some companies will leave the industry. And what's also very important is the awareness of issues such as patents, for which 2024 really was a breakthrough. And I think this is also a trend which will not be able to be turned around anymore, and that will have a big impact on how the industry will work in the future. So from the long perspective, I'd give it probably an 8 or 9.
Okay. Sonia?
I mean, I think, in many ways, people are starting to realize out there that we are at the dawn of a solar era, right? We are at the beginning of a seismic change in terms of how we generate electricity, and that is starting to get through. But I'd say the outlook for us in terms of policy, politics, and geopolitics is still tricky, and there's a lot of work that we have to do in terms of shaping that narrative to go forwards, to lay the foundations for solid growth and really high year-on-year growth going into the future. So from my perspective, from the work that the Global Solar Council does to represent the industry, it's probably sort of still to be decided.
Okay. So no number.
So let's do the 7.
Okay, cool. Jenny?
I'm gonna say a 10, partly because I'm morally obliged not to have too strong an emotional attachment to this industry. And lots got deployed, and I think there's signs that it's actually cutting fossil fuel burn, particularly in Europe, in Pakistan, in a few other places. I think that from the industry perspective, it's going to be some very painful years, but from the perspective of actually achieving an energy transition, I think it was quite a good year, though there are areas where it could be a lot better.
Cool. Okay, great. So again, I think we've seen so many different developments last year, right? I think so overall there was this 35% growth, and some market excelled, there were some surprises, but also we all mentioned all these challenges. But if you look at both positive or negative things that happened, so what surprised you most? Actually, you've been in this industry for such a long time, closely observing what happened, but what kind of really was really surprising?
I'm going to give a negative one. I was surprised by South Africa. South Africa had a boom year in 2023 because people had blackouts and they got fed up of having blackouts, so they bought a lot of solar panels. And then the market actually slowed down in 2024 because there were fewer blackouts. And this was partly because of solar, but it was also because Eskom, the state-owned utility in South Africa, fixed the coal plants. But I found this quite interesting, that even a market which wasn't primarily subsidy driven can have a slump because market conditions change.
Okay.
Maybe as well, positive surprise talking about markets, obviously Pakistan, that I think hardly anybody had on their list going into 2024. And well, I don't know if it's really a surprise, but what was positive was the EU not going for trade measures against the Chinese cells and modules, which I think is strategically the right decision for the EU to take. And therefore, yeah, that was for sure a very positive.
And then on my side, I think definitely seeing Brazil put 25% tariffs on was a negative surprise. We weren't really expecting that. I think there were various different sort of political forces that sort of conspired to create that in Brasilia, but that was a negative surprise. But I think, to me, what I'm really struck by is how the big investors sitting in London and New York and Tokyo and so on are really starting to shift into PV. Some of them are sort of almost leaving other technologies behind and really start to see that the solar plus storage combination is such an incredibly powerful one, and starting to put $500 billion a year this year into the technology, and really invest into their capacity and so on in PV. So to me, the money shows you where the opportunity is in many ways.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, I think I want to structure a little bit, maybe let's talk about growth and demand. So I think you showed numbers. Okay, we had this 35% growth last year. This year we will have around 12%. Jenny, you said now we're entering sort of the one-digit growth territory, now on a somewhat higher level, 8-9%, but then even going to a lower one-digit territory to 5% and less. So I think what the forecasts are at the moment, they are somewhat conservative. So if we look back, I think I've been also working as an analyst for a while, we were always wrong and we were always too negative. Might we be still too negative, or are the challenges now getting really too big, like we see them in Europe, especially now where basically the market is almost stagnating? Or is there something that might have lapsed that we're not seeing, so that again there's another Pakistan and there's 5 or 10 Pakistans at the same time that can kind of lift it higher? You just wrote in the chat also, Jenny, okay, India was actually not just 27, they were 33 gigawatt DC actually last year, which was also quite a surprise. So everyone was hoping for India to do it, but now, and although they are actually even limiting actually the inflow of modules, it is happening.
I would just say that we have this thing called a buffer in our forecast, which is capacity for that is not allocated to markets. Because the problem with individual analysts is that they're cowards, right? If you tell the India analyst, who is an expert on India, that India is going to install 33 gigawatts of solar in 1 year, then the poor guy has a headache. So you can't really bully people who are experts on their market to increase their numbers for no reason. So we basically exogenously add, I think the buffer for 2024 was about 50 gigawatts at the start of 2024, and it's the one for 2025 is, I think it's about 70 gigawatts. So like we do have a chunk of capacity which we expect to be absorbed by these kind of underestimates. But ultimately, if I thought I could just, people get a little bit uncomfortable if you say 50% of the market is unallocated. They start to say, you're not really doing a forecast, are you? You're just making up a number, and they have a point. So I'm going to have to say that I stick with these numbers because we don't see another China emerging. Pakistan is, we have Pakistan at 12.5 gigawatts, but personally, I think that's a somewhat unstable estimate for an annual build, because Pakistan only has about 50 gigawatts of on-grid power capacity. And there is some evidence that that is saturating already, plus the fact that the government may do something to make people pay more to have solar in some way. So I'm going to have to say that I stick with our numbers, because if I didn't stick with our numbers, I would change them.
Okay, so I think in the end, of course, there's China, which has been actually, I think, in the past severely underestimated, and has been at some point even a 2/3 market share globally. So I think so. Henning, you're living in China, and I think so. What you quoted actually. Some consultancies, but what are you seeing actually? I think there's so much commitment, and I think there's so much vision actually, and solar has been also so much on the list, like all these other new technologies like EV. It's really about electrification in that country. So it's not that we're seeing a backlash like we're seeing in Europe and now also probably in the US. So what do you think will China bring to the table in the long run?
Well, China will always bring to the table a very big market. And as you say, in China, the electrification of the industry, of the economy, will not be turned around. I think, that's pretty clear, including, of course, also transport. So China will still have a very big demand for PV for years and probably decades to come. Going back to maybe your initial question, like why do we get the forecasts wrong? I think it's going to be I mean, I'm not an analyst, right? So but I think it's of course hard to really get the forecast right. If we now take Europe and we say, okay, it's going to stagnate or growth, last year in the EU was 4%, this year, single-digit percentage. Okay, but what happens if interest rates really go significantly down again, making debt much cheaper? What happens if that then leads to the 6% mentioned by Jenny, the curtailment, being part of the developers, the investors, project calculations, economic calculations, and they know they won't be able to sell all of the electricity that gets produced. What about solar and storage being much cheaper than investing into the grid and driving demand there? Because in Germany we talk about hundreds of billions we invested into the grid until 2045. What about maybe that big sum is not necessary if solar and storage combined really take off? So I think it's to use this phrase, I think it's more like the catch-up effect. Once what we now see as the challenges, one or two of them really get overcome, the market can also see much faster growth again. So I think and of course people work on solutions. The industry is very energetic, so I think it's a matter of time that we will also overcome the current obstacles.
So solar has become so cheap, so we're by far the lowest cost. Of course, we have a certain generation profile, and that's why like wind too, and variable technologies need cooperation here. So, and I think, Henning, you mentioned storage, and storage could be obviously also a game changer. I think in many countries you see, of course, regulators, governments being very slow. You have still double taxation or whatever it is actually that slows down. So I think the ancillary market is often not there. You can maybe do some on the frequency side, you can do something on the backup side, but I think so the whole portfolio that you could do is not applicable at the moment. So I think, and that's policy, Sonia. So what are you seeing actually? And I think there's countries probably like China where at some point they identify a problem and they go for it and they change it. And actually, that's probably what's happening with storage at the moment. It goes quickly, and then actually it enables also further growth. So what are you seeing actually when you look at the world and talking to policymakers?
Yeah, slowly, market by market, policymakers are starting to put in place a regulatory framework for storage in more and more markets, but it's not happening fast enough. Definitely, we need storage of all types in order to be able to continue to grow. And I think the message we have to keep pushing is we need flexibility, right? We need that flexibility of all types, of which storage is, of course, the number one type, in order to really be able to integrate massive amounts of PV electricity into the grid. But there are plenty of markets where there is no regulatory framework, where the storage doesn't have access to the grid services market, and so we need to be pushing that at every level. We also need to be careful. There will be some markets where there will be a bit of a fight back, right? Where traditional utilities might want to impose some kind of sun tax because they see their traditional business model being undermined. There could be issues. We need to be thinking about enshrining at global level the right to self-generate and self-consume electricity. And I also, in terms of different markets around the world, I do think the US is a good example of a market that has been able to put in place a good framework for battery storage. And indeed, that's part of why, talking of the various markets, China, Pakistan, South Africa, and so on the US, which is obviously, has just started the new Trump administration, we are still cautiously optimistic that deployment may not, necessarily fall off a cliff. For solar and storage, the outlook is still decent, and we are cautiously optimistic about what will happen over the next 4 years. The fundamental economics are still there. Of course, a lot depends on policy decisions, but not everything depends on that. And so we will be watching that closely and thinking about how to respond as a global industry as well over the next weeks and months.
With the policy climate is somewhat changing. I think we have now, and all across the world, more conservative right-wing governments. Actually, I think Germany, we have soon elections. I think the right-wing party was talking about recently that windmills are symbols of shame or something like this. So I think solar is not so much on their agenda like windmills, but of course, what are we seeing? Because there's also this feeling that, of course, those guys, the fossil fuel industry is now coming back. Now we had 2 COPs actually in fossil fuel countries, and you could see actually how the lobbyists were pushing to actually keep our limits and make it not easier for us. So what are you seeing here?
I think so. Everything you say is correct. The thing to remember is that solar, and specifically rooftop solar, and specifically residential rooftop solar, is a vote winner, right? A vote winner in democracies and in countries that are not democracies alike. Why? Because it helps individual households reduce their bills and take control of their electricity bills month by month, and they see the benefits right there in front of them. And so it is something that is immensely politically powerful, and that almost every government and every politician in the world can get behind. So this is our, the strongest card that we have to play. And we really need to be fighting for those self-consumption projects, those rooftop projects that have such power to not just deliver the energy transition, but to also deliver energy access in parts of the world that don't have full access to electricity, and also deliver resilience in energy systems that we will so desperately need as climate impacts continue to increase. So this is what we need to be thinking about politically. This is what we need to be pushing. Yes, anti-China sentiment is rising in many capitals around the world, which doesn't help our cause, but we need to be really showing again and again how we create jobs locally in every village, town, and city in every country around the world, in the installation and in the downstream part of PV. We need to be sharing how we're building a more global and more resilient supply chain. And if we do that, then there's nothing to say that we can't be resilient to the political changes that are likely coming down the line. We know that, yes, politics is moving rightwards in many countries around the world. We're seeing more populism, but solar is fundamentally a vote winner. And so I think we need to be using that to our advantage as much as we can.
Okay. Jenny, when we look at especially Sonia was mentioning the rooftop market, which is sort of our natural turf. So and of course people should have an interest to put solar on their roofs, and they did, especially during the energy crisis, where the rooftop segment in many countries where energy prices went through the roof, both for heating and for electricity, moved solar, kind of invested in heat pumps, kind of started buying electric cars. But as soon as prices dropped, so also did the interest in rooftops. So I think in the US, actually, I think the rooftop segment has been a problem for a while. Actually, in Europe, it has gone down dramatically, actually. And
only about 7%, isn't it? I mean, it's not. I think dramatically is an exaggeration, but it has.
Well, I think so. Maybe C&I improved quite a bit. I think people moved to C&I, but okay, but it went down quite a bit for rooftops, right? So yeah.
I think overall our numbers might end up showing that rooftop in Europe was roughly flat. But of course, in this industry, when things are flat or only grow 5%, everyone says it's a disaster and it's a crash. So and the same with the US, by the way. I mean, the US rooftop market has not crashed. The US rooftop market has slightly eased, and some of the people who were swimming, and the tide has gone out, and some of the people who were swimming naked are now visible. That's more the case. I mean, California's net energy metering 3.0 is not that bad for consumers. It's probably something that had to happen to make solar.
But what we do see, so for example, in Europe, many of the incentive schemes have been revised or run out because they were also energy crisis related. And of course, in those countries where actually you get to a certain share, usually you get to a different sort of net metering, or you call it net billing, like they do in Poland and other countries, or in Holland, as they announced, and then the markets actually go down. But because it's less attractive, we are seeing also grid connection tariffs, actually, which made life difficult in Denmark, for example.
Good.
But we see more and more. On the other hand, of course, we are seeing also dynamic tariffs coming in, and
that's very good. It's negative for solar, but it's very good for flexibility.
Yes. But how are you seeing actually the rooftop segment in general, actually, and I think if you look at different markets, where it's going well, where it's not going so well, and how it should go?
I mean, frankly, I think a lot of the rooftop market needs to have a bit of a cool-off period, because the way it's been developing is completely unsustainable. And so in Europe, there is not the kind of connection with power demand that there needs to be. I mean, even if you build a battery and solar system in Germany, most of the time it will not be optimized for the battery to optimally use solar and charge from the grid when there's power available. So I honestly personally, I'm not particularly worried about a small downturn in net installations in Europe. There is an increase in the number of flexible energy tariffs, which would encourage people to start moving their demand, and more importantly, businesses, to start moving their demand to the middle of the day. But that is far more important than just megawatts deployed per year.
Okay. So it's a lot about regulation. So because what we're seeing obviously also is that especially the DSOs are pointing at solar and saying, hey, you guys actually are the problem. It's not us actually.
They're kind of right.
Kind of building.
I mean, on some level.
Yeah, to certain, on the other hand, you could also say we could, of course, have seen the sign-out times and build out the distribution grids a bit faster. It's because it's not only the transmission grids anymore; it's a lot also about distribution grids, right?
It's a little bit of that, but this is going to be a problem in even markets that have quite good distribution grids. I mean, Germany has quite good distribution grids and has been expanding powerfully, and Europe has fewer of these curtailment problems than the US because the European grids are basically a lot better, which is great. But solar projects do all still generate at much the same time. And that is not a problem that is going to go away with investment unless you invest in something like batteries or flexibility. And an investment in those really lags behind solar investment.
Does it help, Henning, actually, that companies are also now turning into full solution providers? So like you also offer batteries actually, and you come with the whole package. So that means when there's a customer, actually, they are also then offered, everything. So that helps really flexibility.
Yeah, I think that the whole thinking is changing. So I think that no matter if it's a house owner, so residential system, no matter if it's a CNI customer, no matter if it's a utility customer, I think more and more customers really think solar now as solar and storage, and maybe also try to optimize the generation with the load. So short, yes, the thinking is more holistic, and it's not just about generation, but also when to use the power that gets generated. And then, of course, also, well, what can I still do with my storage device if it's not full of solar power? Or when it's not full of solar power.
So maybe I think so from your point of view, if we look into 2025, which will be the maybe top markets to look at and why?
You mean globally?
Yeah.
Well, top markets like, I mean, China, of course, will be the biggest market. We again, I mean, for 2025 in Europe, we do not foresee too much growth. However, maybe the transition or the start of the transition, right? What I just said, that again, solar is being seen as more holistic, together with storage, energy management, whatever you have, load management. Then, well, the US will be very important, seeing what happens there. Our view is kind of the same as Sonia's, saying, you know, installations will not this year fall off the cliff. And then maybe upsides in Latin South America or in, you know, China, like Asia outside of China. But do we see a Pakistan? You know, I don't see it. But then we can talk again in 1 year, right?
Well, Indonesia is now at least turning into a new manufacturing hub as we see. So maybe
from a manufacturing perspective, it's really internationalizing, right? And different module suppliers, module manufacturers go to different countries, which also is interesting because, of course, it started, you know, the big deployment started in China, and then the Chinese companies went to Southeast Asia, no matter which one of the countries, but still in the region. And now there's really more a diversification also in this regard. Some go to other Southeast Asian countries, some go to the Middle East, some, as we do, we go to various countries in order to, you know, be able to live with volatilities. So that's also very interesting that different countries, companies are choosing different countries where to invest now.
Thanks. Okay, Jenny, something to add?
I think I'm done.
Okay, maybe Sonia, from the policy maybe you can see that also from the policy perspective. So what's for 2025 really actually the not only the markets, but what's actually the key you are pushing for actually over this year? We have also COP in Brazil, so I think a renewables friendly state government also.
Yeah, no, that's right. Look, I think the conclusion from all of this is that the challenges are getting more complex. They're about market design, they're about regulatory, typical regulatory issues. The solutions are flexibility, reform of electricity markets, batteries, storage, and so on. And so we need to get organized as an industry, right? We are incredibly disorganized as an industry. We have very weak representation of our interests at national level, at regional level, and still at global level. I would say we need to get better at getting our needs and views and interests across to the regulators, to policymakers, in order to solve these challenges. And so we really need to be investing in our industry associations all over the world to make sure that we don't run into trouble in markets in the future like we've done a couple times in the past. So for me, that's the key conclusion here. We need to get organized as an industry.
Okay, maybe so everyone a tagline for 2025. So what will be the solar tagline? A little bit crystal ball, because of course we don't know what happened. What if we were now at the end of 2025, what do you think would have been the tagline? So as you're looking at the market.
Would say in a lot of different areas and fields, diversification. It's going to be much more diverse in terms of products, in terms of solutions, in terms of supply chains. Yeah, much more diverse.
Okay.
For me, we're really at the dawn of a solar era, so let's make it happen.
Okay, Sonia? Sorry, is Jenny?
I think it's pretty much the end of the beginning of solar. The end of the beginning of the solar era. I mean, the beginning was the point where solar penetration was really low and you could just stick solar modules everywhere and feed into the grid and ask people to pay you the avoided cost of generation at that one moment in time. And I think we're going into a period where there's a lot of solar and a lot of solar still being built, but there are more complicated questions about what this does to the power system that actually the people buying it have to have some concern for, because some of those costs are being passed on to them. So yes, the end of the beginning of the age of cheap solar.
Okay, end of the beginning, dawn of the real solar age. And while we're doing that, we have to diversify. Cool. Thanks a lot to everyone. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Henning. Thanks, Sonia. That was great. Just a few words from me to the end. So thanks again for JA to sponsor this event. If you want to learn more, we're publishing regularly reports. The last one was on top solar modules and inverters and storage solutions, which we recently published. This week or next week, we will publish a market survey on backsheets and encapsulations. Please save the date, actually. Also, we're doing another physical event, April 10, 11 in India. I think that's probably the market to be on the manufacturing side, demand side, solar technology with a focus on technology. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. And thanks again. Talk soon. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Words from me to the end. So thanks again for JA to sponsor this event. If you want to learn more, we're publishing regularly reports. The last one was on top solar modules and inverters and storage solutions, which we recently published. This week or next week, we will publish a market survey on backsheets and encapsulations. Please save the date, actually. Also, we're doing another physical event, April 10, 11 in India. I think that's probably the market to be on the manufacturing side, demand side, solar technology with a focus on technology. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. And thanks again. Talk soon. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.